And we're going to move right along into our next session for today, a really important dialogue that is entitled Crafting a Corporate Culture That Means Something. So I would like to introduce, first of all, our moderator, and then I'll turn it over to the moderator to introduce the rest of the esteemed panel. But it will be moderated by Brandon Call, who is managing editor of DCEO magazine. So please join me in welcoming Brandon Call and the rest of this wonderful panel for building a corporate culture that means something.
Is everyone good and caffeinated? Good morning. My name is Brandon Call. I'm the managing editor of DCEO magazine. I'm wearing my sparkle shoes this morning, so let's have some fun with this panel. For those of you who may not be familiar, DCEO is the business title of D Magazine Partners. And humble brag here, we've been named the best regional business publication in the country for 5 out of the last 7 years. So right here in Dallas. We produce a weekly e-newsletter, a monthly print magazine, and the annual Dallas 500 publication, which actually is hot off the presses this week. So many of your CEOs are probably in here. You can read executive bios anywhere. What we do with the Dallas 500 is we want to give readers a sense of who an executive really is and what makes them tick. We ask 500 of the area's most influential executives about their toughest challenges and strategies for business and for motivating their employees. But we also ask some more personal things, like what their favorite object is, hobbies and passions, and what they tell an 18-year-old version of themselves. We ask what they'd order as their last meal. New this year, we also asked about local executive pets. And boy, do executives really love their pets. Inside this book are nuggets that you simply can't find anywhere else, and also, as we're here to talk about today, help to humanize and personalize local business leaders and the companies they lead in a real and authentic way. But before we get to all of that, let's meet our esteemed panelists this morning who will help us unravel crafting a company culture. Panelists?
Hi, my name is Yvonne Freeman. I'm the head of Total Rewards and HR Operations at Sabre, which is based here in Dallas.
Awesome. Good morning. I'm Ashley Oster, and I work for E4E Relief, and we are a public charity, and we work with corporations across the country to set up employee relief programs for disaster and hardship.
Good morning. I'm Catherine Oliveri. I'm the Senior Vice President of Human Resources for Susan G. Komen. We are a breast cancer organization that honestly serves people on all fronts. So we do advocacy work, we do research, we help in our communities to make sure people can get to care and treatment, and also make sure that we've got quality care and access to care across communities in the United States.
Hi, I'm Ollie Malone. I'm the Vice President of Human Resources at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. We fly you in, we fly you out, and we'll fly you around.
Very important. To start this morning, let's begin with an overarching question. Why is crafting culture and aligning it with your company's mission so important? Who wants to start?
I will. I think that we all talk about how people are really important, and I think every company has a culture, and you can say good or bad on where you want to go. But I think being deliberate and intentional about what you want that to be, just like a business strategy, it aligns where you're going, kind of like a compass and a true north in how you interact and the things that you offer your team members. So I think it's just important to be intentional so you can keep going back to it.
Yeah, I think now that the culture matters so much to so many people coming into the workplace, so it's not really an option to be blasé or hope something works out. I think you have to connect it into why the work, what the work is that you do, why that work matters, and how you're going to integrate that among the people that you invite to be a part of your company, and also how your day in and day out things play out. So it's about space, it's about attire, it's about lingo, it's much broader than I think people think, but I do think that it matters that, very much like you're saying, that it's something that you're being thoughtful about, because the lack of intentionality is also a culture. So.
And I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I think in culture, it really begins with everything that you do, whether onboarding someone and what that experience is like, all the way through how you treat someone when they decide to leave the organization. And we are very intentional about the words that we use in communications, and the one thing that we're really focused a lot on now is feedback, and making sure that we have two-way feedback and accountability that's very strong. So part of that is developing then a common vernacular for everyone to use and to share, but it's really a very intentional process, and you may be going, you work for an organization that is a nonprofit and mission-based, but it's the same thing. So when someone comes to work for us in accounting, we are mission-based and we're very, very focused on that, but you still have someone who's doing their job. And so how do you make sure that we're sending that message and making sure that that permeates through everything that we do?
I would answer the question a little bit differently, and I'd answer it based on some research that I did many years ago when I was with the Mead Corporation, and we were in the process of wanting to bring about some fairly significant changes there. We stumbled upon a draft of a book that was being written by John Kotter at the Harvard Business School with the title Corporate Culture and Performance. It is a fascinating book, and I still have it in draft form with John Kotter's signature on it, because one of the things that Kotter did in that book was he studied organizations over a 10-year period to look at performance and to look at culture. Yeah. And he found a very strong correlation between what he described as strong cultures and corporate performance. So I think that those of us who are in HR, oftentimes we're guilty of not thinking about the business performance, and yet this is one area where we can very much weigh in on the importance of business performance, as is evidenced by the intentionality of a culture that we create or don't, and what the impact that has on the bottom line. So there's lots and lots and lots of data in the years since John wrote his original book that supports that evidence that I'd like to make sure we include in the conversation.
So we cheated and had a conference call before, so a lot of this is a little rehearsed, but we'll try not to be too rehearsed for you. Yvonne, in our prior talk, when I asked about if company culture was formed top-down, or organically, you mentioned the importance of a company's culture not simply being imposed by the C-suite. Leadership buy-in is important, is it not?
I think it's really important. I think when we were talking, so I'm a big believer in that a big part of human resources job, if you will, is to kind of hold the organization accountable for, if you say you want to be a certain way, but then you act and do things a different way, people see right through it kind of right away. So the leaders can say one thing, but if the organization isn't seeing it through actions and communications, everything we've kind of listed out, then it's not going to work, and everything starts to fall apart. So I think when we were talking about kind of the way it forms, hopefully you all do engagement surveys or whatever form you call that in your organization, and that's part of the dialogue and the listening. And the organization tends to define itself. So one of the early steps in the process is saying, well, who are we? And then figuring out where do you want to go. So the top, I think, can say, well, here's where we think we need to go. But knowing where you are and knowing where you want to get to is gonna be the path to how will you get there. So you can talk a lot about it from the top, but if it doesn't line up with kind of a plan and who you are, then it's never gonna work.
Yeah.
Can I just add something to that? Because one of the things that we have rolled out at Komen really kind of speaks to that. So we have rolled out accountability training. And part of that accountability training is through Partners in Leadership, but it's really based on the Oz principle. And the Oz principle says that people's experiences create their beliefs, which then create their actions, which then turn into your results. And it speaks, very pointedly to that. And so the reality is, we were talking a few minutes ago about, part of the culture here is to make sure that things start on time. Well, that's one thing to say it.
Right.
But then if people's experience, so you have a new person come in and say, this is what we believe, and the first meeting they go to starts 5 minutes late, and the next meeting starts 5 minutes late, that has completely gone out of the window. So it really is, it's very basic, I think, but I think it's very true, and speaks to that, that process and the reality of human behavior, how what we do speaks much louder than what we say.
Ollie, in our call, you mentioned, especially for larger organizations like DFW Airport, that cultures can vary across departments from manager to manager, depending on mission. What can companies do to be intentional about harmonizing these many different, sometimes competing cultures that may exist within an organization?
I think it's a matter of finding common ground. Every organization has divisions that tend to take on a life of their own. And if you're in an organization that has been brought together as a result of acquisitions, it's even more profound. Part of my history was at Pennzoil Quaker State. And when I joined Pennzoil Quaker State, it was the two organizations, Pennzoil and Quaker State, coming together. I made the mistake of thinking that was all there was. Once I got into the organization, I discovered that there were all kinds of legacy organizations that preceded the Pennzoil designation and preceded the Quaker State designation. Were you Quaker State from Pennsylvania, Oil City, Pennsylvania? People got into very, very defined groups. But there had to be a place where we agreed that this is what we're about. Even though we exercise our activities or our professional focuses in different ways, there are certain fundamentals. One of my clients when I was on my own was the Secret Service. And I loved working with the Secret Service only because everybody talks about the mission. I felt like I was really kind of missing it because I didn't have a deep mission other than keep this gig going for a while. But, the whole notion of being mission-minded. And I think that's what organizations need to find. That is the bedrock of the culture. What is our mission? What are we here to do? Now, we exercise it in different ways, but the fundamental piece has to be clear and it has to be consistent.
Ashley, I actually love your thoughts on the importance of individual managers leading by example and not being afraid to show humanity on the job. Can you elaborate on this in particular, why this is particularly important for culture?
Yeah, I just think that the attunement of the leaders is really significant, whether you're the leader of the whole organization or you are a manager in a particular group. Being attuned to a couple different things. One would be being attuned to those who you can tell within your organization are influencers, and paying attention to it seems like a lot of people are attracted to what's going on over here, or seeing what ideas they have and noticing their influence and then drawing them in and taking in their ideas and being aware of what they have. And I think the other thing is, we are all so much more interconnected now than so many workplaces used to be. Even in my experience, oops, sorry, I keep hitting the mic. Oh my gosh, I gotta put these down. So even in my experience, it used to be so much more bifurcated that you have your home life and you have your work life. And now everybody's life is so much more interconnected. So how do you honor a whole person coming into work? What do you do as a manager and as leaders to say, I know this person has, a lot that goes on in their life. How do we integrate that into the culture of our place? And how do we take care of each other in that as well?
Yeah. Catherine, you've mentioned that Susan G. Komen's organization has launched a culture of accountability and with two-way feedback, survey benchmarks against peers. What does a culture of accountability mean to you? And more importantly, how do we measure that?
So the culture of accountability really means that people are all in themselves individually. So when I've been with Komen about 4 years, and honestly, when I started, there were so many people that just looked up to leadership and to say, well, okay, what should I do? What do you want me to do? What's the right answer? What's the right answer? And so it really is about the whole intent of what we're doing is really trying to shift that dynamic, because the reality is the people that are doing the work, hands on, kind of boots on the ground, they know it better than we do. So how do we make sure that we get that feedback? And honestly, then that one of the products of that also then is trust, because trust increases as well as collaboration, and then feedback. So what we've tried to do is give people the tools, the resources, the vernacular to be able to use in a safe way, to give feedback, share feedback, and make the organization stronger. So how we gauge it kind of goes back to what you were talking about, Ollie. So part of it is our results and how we're doing by area. We've developed KPIs across the organization to look at how much of an impact we're having. And then part of it is also our engagement and culture surveys that we do to see, are we moving the needle in the areas that we want to move the needle to make sure that we're continuing to get better. So I hope that kind of explains it, but it's really goes back to what we were talking about before, of making sure that what they see every day, their experience does create the right belief, because then people are much more likely to take the actions that we want them to take, and move everyone forward.
I think, can I just add one thing to that? So I think there's something about, so I have 3 kids, but there's something about culture that's kind of like the why. So I think when you're raising kids, which company employees, populations are often like kids, where you're constantly, just stay with me for a second. They're kind of like, you hope that by telling people and talking to them and asking, do they understand, and repeatedly saying why it's important that most of the time you eat well, but every once in a while you can go off the rails and have something that's like your guilty pleasure. So whatever it is that you're teaching them, so that when you're not looking, right, that they behave and do things. So when we talked about early in the beginning is like, why does it matter? Is I think because you said it really well, like you do KPIs and you do surveys, you do all these things so that you can kind of hold up and have a dialogue around what matters and where we're going, what's our company mission. But it all comes back to the why, because then if somebody says, why did you make that policy change? Why would we do this? Why would we buy that company? Why? Because it should all, to keep yourselves honest, it should get you to your never-ending mission, because you're never going to get there.
Right.
But how you behave along the way is really kind of the why. So that when we're all not looking, right? Mm-hmm. So if you weren't here, we should have come to the stage on time, because that's a thing, right? And so we would have done it.
Value,
right,
yes.
Exactly. So sorry, just thought I'd throw that in there.
Great. At D Magazine, we sort of brag about having an entrepreneurial culture. At the magazine, though, we were taking personality tests, and we're being very intentional. And what we found was that D Magazine has 75% idea people. And so we have lots of ideas, but then to be able to execute, right? And so in hiring, you want to hire for the culture, but why might that be problematic in some cases, as we found at D Magazine?
Well, there's a value in diversity of thought, right? So diversity years ago meant different than what it does now. So when you're hiring and recruiting, people want to know, what does your company stand for? How will I fit in? And I think there's a shift happening where when companies talk about culture, you aren't just going to say, here's our culture, because people are trying to figure out how will they fit in. So every person you hire actually adds to the culture, shouldn't become like absorbed by it. Right. So I think that's a new kind of space that's emerging.
Yeah.
So.
And for D, we're very intentional about our onboarding process now, and there's a lot more, we're a family-owned company, very small, 100 employees, and so there wasn't a lot of structure around that process, but now there is, and being very intentional about that.
I think the other thing we have to keep in mind when we talk about having kind of a monolithic culture is we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And I began my career at AT&T, and AT&T, had a very defined culture, and those of you who remember AT&T many years ago. You remember that very defined culture. And there were some of us who came into the organization who didn't exactly fit in. And the issue wasn't race or gender, the issue was thought, and that we brought a different level of thinking. And the question is that thinking welcome here? Can I express my point of view without feeling as if I'm going to be, voted off the island? And in that organization, and I don't know how it is now, I've been away for a number of years, it was very difficult to voice a different opinion. And you risk ostracism, or we had a phrase there that we used called a career limiting move. Yeah. That it was a career limiting move to say certain things to certain people under certain circumstances, which to me gets to the point of what I think HR does in that setting, and that is HR has to speak the unspoken. It has to be a voice for the voiceless, which sometimes puts us in an unpopular position to be the one lone voice that say, no, we really don't do this. We say we do. It's on plaques, it's on the wall, but that isn't really what we do.
Yeah.
And if we were to have honest conversations, then we would tell the truth. But it also, the intent of that is not just to make people feel bad, but to just true up the culture.
Right.
To say, if we really want to be that, then let's be that. And let's stop saying we're going to be this and doing something different. That kind of cultural schizophrenia is not a healthy thing.
Well, and that's the thing. People see right through that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Another company, obviously, Dallas-based company, very famous, that has a very strong culture that quite literally wrote the book on company culture when it was founded more than 50 years ago, Southwest Airlines, right? Of course, societal norms have changed in 5 decades. Smoking, for instance, is probably no longer one of the many examples. Updating company policies, as Southwest did, to allow jeans in the workplace. Revolutionary in the 70s, right?
Horrors.
It's an obvious way to help keep up with the times. What are some other things that companies can do, whether it's setting policies, about being intentional with their culture to be responsive with the times?
Yeah, I think that, if you're really trying to be responsive to the times, you need to be able to acknowledge some of the intergenerational differences. I feel like there's a lot of walking on eggshells about the fact that you have lots of different generations represented in your workplace. So what does it look like to recognize the different needs that come there, the different motivations, different ideas around entitlement, different ideas around belonging. And I think putting those things in the room takes away some of this power that feels like we're separate, because you're not. I mean, really, everybody, back to this idea of humanity, you have a lot of whole people showing up who want to be able to contribute, who want to be able to be valued. It just plays out very differently among the different generations. So I think, so the second to that is acknowledging the intergenerational, and then also staying curious. I don't think that there's many people coming into the workplace today that love being told, this is how we do it, So I think staying curious about new ideas, even if you're going to be like, that jean idea. I mean, recently I heard from a company that was like, he let us have jeans Fridays. They can't have any holes. They need to be down to here. They can't. And I was like, wow, way to revolutionize, So I think you have to actually be open and then also speak truth back to that. If you are hearing somebody that wants to express a new idea, be curious, stay open, and then also tell, I don't know if we're there yet, and I think people really appreciate that authenticity and willingness to be curious together.
So we're rolling out a recognition program that's peer-to-peer based. I think it's not about my company. I think recognition is I'm a hand talker too. So recognition is a way to hold up and tie, here's what we value, kind of people, feedback is a gift, but sometimes getting feedback that's a positive, not just here's what you could have done better, is nice. So I think tying it to who you are and what you want to be, it teaches people, reinforces what you like. Also, celebration is a big part of that. So today's Brandon's birthday, so everybody say happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
We should have said that when we came out. But I think it brings levity in the workplace, and it kind of, we're going to roll it out in such a way where it's not the top 100, 200 people that can give an award, but there's actually a value that can be placed to it. And we're hoping that will continue to reinforce the culture of it's about all of us doing it together, like you said, not a couple of people and what do they do when you're not looking. So.
At D Magazine, my desk is definitely decorated with streamers and lots of birthday celebration, and that's one of the things that we do for every employee to make sure they feel a part of the whole. We do it for everyone. Actually, I loved, let's see, corporate social responsibility. Let's see.
I'm sure it's something genius.
It was.
Yeah. Tell us more.
Oh, okay. I had a timely question.
Okay,
It's very
I'm
important. Because many of us here in the room probably know someone or know a colleague who was probably affected by the 10 tornadoes who touched down 2.5 weeks ago. When tragedy like that hits, why is it critical for the company culture to show that companies have their employees' backs during these times?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And yes, we traveled in and saw the damage from the tornadoes. And oh my gosh, it's very different to see it on the news than to actually be driving around in your neighborhood. So I'm sorry for any of you and your employees who were impacted by the recent tornadoes. And yeah, so E-Free Relief, like I said, works with companies all over the country. And it's fascinating to see the different cultures that as soon as they call you, they're just saying, we want to make sure that if our employees have anything happen to them, an unforeseen circumstance, that they know we're here to support them. We want to help them. We want to make sure that peers can also support each other. That's actually one of the things that happens most often with the companies is that you guys may have all had people last week that said, how can we help so-and-so? I know they lost their roof. I know their basement is flooded. I know their car got ripped up. How can we help them? And so I think it's really significant to know that there are avenues that corporate social responsibility, HR teams are thinking of in advance, that you are ready because it's a reality. Disasters are happening far more frequently. They're far more expensive. And also everybody has hardships that are coming through everybody's life, an accident, an illness, something that is unexpected. So that feeling that you're going into work at a place that cares about you and that recognizes that sometimes things that you can't predict are going to happen, but they're going to be there to help you is, I think it creates a sense of loyalty. We also find that it creates a sense of, and somebody brought this up earlier, maybe it was in the first, productivity. Oh, you were saying in the beginning, it makes a big difference. You want to go back in and work for that place that has your back when you aren't as strong. So yes, I think it matters to the organization.
CSR right now is a very hot topic.
Yes.
Corporate social responsibility helps a company be socially accountable for itself, its shareholders, and the public. Why is it critical that a company's CSR conversations align with crafting culture? Anyone?
I think it's a reflection of who you are, again, showing up through your actions as a company. So, I think all of us know in the recruiting space, people that are earlier in their career ask more about it. I think people that are later in their career maybe appreciate it more because they see the difference between how companies used to act and how they do act, and showing up in a way that, again, supports and gives back. It's not just a differentiator. I think it goes into the loyalty, like who are we? Because when things go wrong at work and you want me to stay later and put my life aside and kind of bend over backwards, am I going to say, you know what, it's 5 o'clock, it's usually when I go, I'm out of here, this will be here tomorrow? Or do I kind of remember top of mind or subconsciously, I want to step up and give more of my discretionary effort because the company is there for me or others when they needed it most. So it's a little bit of that relationship with your company, which I think for a while, 15, 20 years ago, started to disappear, and I think now it's starting to come back.
Yeah, that trust. Catherine, you talked a little bit about acknowledging that trust is important to company culture. What are some of the elements that shape trust?
Well, I really think it's a lot of what we've talked about from the perspective of, what do you do? Kind of what actions are you taking when you say that about even corporate social responsibility? It's who you are, who you stand for, what matters. And I think, there are a lot of organizations out there who are doing very well, who are focused on nothing but the bottom line. But I think that's well known then what the trade-offs are in doing that. And I think it's important not just to attract people and to keep people, to show that we're, as an organization, human and compassionate and caring and wanting to take care of and give back to the communities that we're in. But I think it's also important then when you look at, in my personal opinion, the longevity of an organization, and kind of speaking to what you were saying about how well then you stand the test of time. So.
I was just going to make a quick remark that I think sometimes it can be less complicated if you think about the core values of your organization. CSR should be a very natural way to express what you do, who your people are. So, for example, we met with an awesome company last week that is in the agriculture business, and we were talking about disaster relief, and they were saying, that their response is that they always make sure they're helping the local food banks and that they're having food. And you're like, right, line up your business, the resources that you have, the things that you value, and move those into a charitable setting. And those things should be, a natural offering. It doesn't, and don't try to be everything, I think is my one piece. It works much better if you line up and don't try to be everything in the community, but do the thing that you can do well and offer well.
That's a good point.
I was just going to get back to your point, Brandon, around trust and the importance of trust in an organization. A friend of mine told me many years ago, or defined trust as the belief and the competence of another, which is interesting to me because when I go into an organization as an employee, part of the question that I'm asking myself is, do I believe that the people who are at the top of the organization are sufficiently competent to run this organization for me to entrust my years, my life, my energy in being a part of this organization? That's a question that I think people are asking all of the time. And so I'm looking to those individuals to do those things that say, hey, you got me in mind when you make decisions about raises or benefits or any number of other things that are important to an employee's livelihood, that's being considered. When you make decisions about, do we invest in the community? Where in the community? Who in the community gets the investment? Do people like me get the investment, or it's only people who live where you live get the investment? All of those kinds of things, I think, speak to the area of trust, and the culture. Is the culture broad enough and inclusive enough to include a broad range of possibilities, broad range of people, demographics, or is it uniquely limited to only one group?
Well, and I think, so not everything goes according to plan and perfectly a lot of times at work.
No.
And so I think how companies act when they misstep or don't get it right, which I won't rattle off names because there's plenty of articles, but when companies don't get it right, and to see how the company then acts or behaves after that, it's really about the fix that really establishes trust. Exactly.
I think the best example of that for me, Yvonne, was Johnson & Johnson years ago, the Tylenol scare.
Yeah.
I happened to be at Johnson & Johnson doing some work there when all of that broke. And it was, to me, I wanted to write a book, just sit there and just write. What are they doing? Who's saying what? And how are we responding? Because the way they responded was very much in keeping with their culture.
Right.
In fact, the questions that they were asking was, what does the credo suggest as our response? So what is the thing that we put on the wall and we say, this is how we're going to guide our lives? Now that we're in the midst of this crisis, and the usual tendency is, how do we protect our reputation? How do we forget that noise, and how do we focus on the thing that we say is most important to us? And if you follow their stock actually was higher after that crisis than it was before. So it really does underscore the importance of not only defining the culture, but behaving consistently, even when it's really difficult to do so.
Yeah.
Especially
And I would just add authentic to that too, because I think sometimes companies and individuals try to be something they're not. And, I think that's if somebody fell down and they fell down hard, I think that's the first thing they need to acknowledge is, I just fell down.
Yeah,
and I did it myself. No one tripped me. And I think that does, people understand that, and I think people respect it, which helps build and continue that trust.
Ollie, I love a quote from our call last week when you mentioned, if companies don't have an intentional cultures, they'll have accidental ones. What does this mean? Can you elaborate?
Sure. I coined the terms intentional and accidental really based on a lot of John Cotter's work, because I was looking on one hand at this group that was very intentional. They did certain things, the onboarding, everything they did around rewards and reinforcement was clearly very intentional. But I also believe that there are accidental cultures. That is, they evolve on their own, through, it's almost like kids who are raised by wolves, so it's like, we know that happens. It's not ideal. We'd like to have a little bit more value input in that, but cultures will form one way or another. Either you will determine how the culture is going to be formed and shaped and what's important, who we are, just like you say with your children. This is who we are as a family. If you don't tell them that, they'll make up their own story. Nature still abhors a vacuum.
And they still
So
And it's usually worse when they make up a story.
Oh, absolutely. It's a nightmare when you have to explain to the teachers why your children are behaving this way and why you haven't taught them any better. So,
Or you taught them the way you wanted them to be.
absolutely, yes. So I think that whole notion of accidental cultures, when I've gone into organizations and I've said to them, is this an intentional culture or is this an accidental culture? And, and if the answer is accidental, there's another question. What's the evidence of that? What would I see here that would say this is intentional? What are you doing intentionally? Who's being promoted intentionally? Who's being denied promotion intentionally? Who are your heroes or your sheroes in the organization? Intentionally. All of those questions give me an answer that speaks to intentionality. And if you don't have a good answer for that, then you're letting this thing evolve on its own. And that's like a runaway train.
Yeah. Yvonne, from our call, I really liked when you talked about how companies should treat employees as if they are consumers, since workers are making a deliberate choice every day to show up and work. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, and so I did spend quite a bit of my work life in corporate retail, not there now, but I think what we all can relate to in the kind of weird market crash that happened in 2008, 2009 really retrained and put more power into the consumer in terms of, I think consumers took back the power of how to spend their dollars because companies were really hurting because of the economic impact. And so the analogy to the workplace is, look, people don't typically go work for one company for 40 or 50 years anymore. And so they're always liable to get a call or to see a job on LinkedIn or be approached by somebody through networking events. And it's really how they feel that they're being treated and engaging with their coworkers or their company. And it goes back to that actions piece. And so I like to say that, their dollar they're voting with is their time, because time is precious. And so it's kind of that thing, if I'm gonna spend a lot of my time here, I might as well like the people that I work with. So it goes back to, that culture that you surround them with and how you treat people and how they're being treated. Yeah, people leave people, but people leave companies.
Absolutely.
And who they're leaving are the people that are all around them at all levels. And so that's kind of why I think HR people should act more like marketing people to try to get them to remember that every day they walk through that door when they're coming to their building or their home office, whatever setting is, they're making judgments on how am I being treated, how does this make me feel? So that when they do get the call, they're like, nah, I'm good. Or, yeah, let's talk more about that. So that's kind of what I meant.
Yeah. I think we have time for one last question, and everyone feel free to chime in here. In today's competitive workforce, everyone's competing for that, millennial next generation worker. Why is having a strong and clear corporate culture so important, particularly for hiring and attracting talent today?
I think they're paying so much attention. So you want to too. And I think part of this idea around authenticity and intentionality is even when they come, like, tell the stories of who you are, tell the stories of how your company came to be, tell the story, even of how that culture progressed, because much like the people coming into your organization, they're whole people with unique stories, so is your company. So I think inviting them into that, naming the things that are real about the workplace you are, I mean, I think it's that incongruity is really tough if you say, this is who we are, and then all of a sudden they come to work there the first day and they're like, yeah, I'm not feeling that. I didn't see that. I wasn't appreciated. So I think you have to integrate the truth of the stories, who you are, where you came from, right away when you're meeting somebody, and see if that's a good fit for who they are.
Well, I think nothing feels worse than 6 months down the road, someone coming up to you that you interviewed and going, you didn't tell me that this was, and then you're like, sorry. So I think it's easier I wanted someone to be with me. No, it's just easier to be honest about who you are and just tell them where you aspire to go, and that's why you should come here, so you can help us get there.
Invitation.
Well, and I think everybody wants that. They want a sense of purpose. They want a sense of belonging. And how, the challenge for any organization, in my opinion, is how do you make sure that you have that to support a diverse group of people? And I mean true diversity, from diversity of thought to diversity of background to that's what really makes you stronger. And that's the thing that I know we all wish we could have a box for.
Absolutely.
That open up and share wherever we are. But it's hard work. But it's good work, and I think if so much of it is listening as well as giving feedback, so you can really understand what's happening. But I think that's what people want. And the interesting thing to me, when I look at a lot of the surveys that are done across generations, I think the younger folks now coming into the workforce, they're much more vocal about it, and quite frankly, probably because of us, as parents, and they've listened to us and seen what what we're like when we come home from work and things like that. But it's really helping engage them and listen. So what the millennials want, or what the younger generations want, I think everybody wants anyway. They're just not verbalizing it. So, I think it can be hard work, but I also think once you can find that unlock in your organization, it can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. I agree with the point around purpose. I think authors like Rick Warren and Richard Leider, who've written about purpose, have helped us fuel our own internal senses of purpose. And what we're seeing with a lot of the young people who are joining our organizations is they don't just join a company, they join a cause. And that's what they want to be a part of. And if this aligns with my cause, whatever that is, I'm there. And if I find that it doesn't align, then see you around.
Okay, well, in keeping with the culture of From Day One, we'll make sure we get you to that coffee break on time. Thank you guys. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.